Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marsh, if we can continue, please. Was it your understanding that in the course of an investigation, Post Office investigators may have occasion to involve the police service?
Yes, that's true.
In what circumstances?
In the circumstances where it was felt that a search would be required and that the suspect may not be willing to allow that search. In the circumstances where, and this is involving the police in advance, where it was believed that the suspect may not be willing to attend voluntarily for an interview or something like that. And also in circumstances where, for one reason or another, it's necessary for them to effect a citizen's arrest on a suspect, again, usually because they couldn't undertake a search or something like that, at which point they would then do so. But of course, not being police officers, we couldn't then move or remove a suspect, so we would have to wait for police officers to attend.
Did Post Office investigators rely on the police service in order to get access to the police national computer in order either to read information on it or to enter data into it, or could they do that themselves?
No, well, they couldn't do it themselves, but centrally, Royal Mail Group and all its predecessor organisations had right of access to the PNC for a variety of purposes. And although we lost a number of those rights with privatisation, the fundamental right to access the PNC, to put suspect or offender details onto it and to get details of people who were already on there remained. Certainly up to the point when I left in 2017.
And so it wasn't read-only access. They could make entries centrally to the PNC or amend entries. Centrally,
about half a dozen people at most were trained and vetted to do so, that's right.
And in order for them to do that, did they have to be passed information by an investigator in order to enter the data up?
That's right, yeah.
What information would an investigator pass to the, I'm going to call them the Post Office PNC people, in the course of an investigation, and at what stages?
Well, it wouldn't be in the course of an investigation, although the necessary information to put a person onto the PNC as an offender would be gathered by the investigator and would be present in the preamble to the report that we looked at. It's my belief that actually we didn't make an entry to the PNC until a person had been convicted, and only after conviction would we make that entry, using the offender report, using information drawn from the offender report.
So, unlike the police service, when somebody was circulated as wanted, as outstanding on a warrant for arrest, charged, all pre-conviction stages where entries may be made onto the PNC, that didn't occur. It was only post-conviction.
That's my belief. Again, it's one of the many jobs within my team that I didn't do myself, but from memory, that's my belief, yes, that we wouldn't make that entry. When you talk about circulated, obviously one goes to court to get a warrant if in the event of non-appearance. In those circumstances, I think it's actually the court or the police officer attached to the court that makes that entry. If we wanted somebody circulated, then somebody, an investigator, would have gone into a police station, by arrangement, would have reported the crime that we were investigating and would therefore have arranged for that person to be circulated as wanted. So those were things that we could do, but not through our own terminals.
Going back to the provision of information to the police service by the Post Office centrally post-conviction, that information you said was drawn from the offender report, a template for the first page of which we saw before lunch.
That's correct.
In order to provide the police service with information to be entered onto the PNC, or to enter information onto the PNC, one must conform to the standards set by the PNC, presumably.
That's correct.
Was there any policy or practice within the Post Office or Royal Mail Group that you're aware of that required investigators to record the racial or ethnic origin of those whom they investigated?
There was a requirement to do so using the term identity code, because it was not possible to put a person onto the police national computer without either giving one of 6 numerical codes that in a very crude way defined the person's identity code. And it was a term, these codes were previously known as ethnic groups, and they were definitely neither ethnic nor groups of people, but the term identity code was used 1 to 6, and then the 7th code number, which oddly enough was 9, was where it was not known or other. And yeah, as I say, you couldn't put a person onto the PNC without either giving them a code 1 to 6 or giving them a code 9.
And presumably the Post Office would therefore wish to know from the police what those codes were and how any further guidance on who fell within which group was to be applied.
Yes, so the Post Office, this is the Post Office stroke consignia stroke Royal Mail, through the Home Office had always had details in extremely neutral terms of what the description of those code numbers was. And those appeared on the form that the PNC inputters used and were available to investigators for information, so that they knew what IC number to accord to a suspect.
Because you'd need to know what the IC codes were and how they were understood by the operators of the police national computer before you could, in the Post Office, provide them with the data.
There's got to be a consistency, otherwise the
whole system's useless.
Exactly, yes.
You remember that as part of the file front sheet document I showed you earlier, I'm not going to bring it back up now, I asked us all to remember it. It said ID code or identification code.
Yes.
It said 1 to 7 in brackets afterwards. Was that the space on the front page of the file, or the offender report, that the identity code of the suspect was written?
That was, yeah, that's correct.
And is it from there that the Post Office centrally would provide, or would take information in order to provide to the PNC in the event of a conviction?
I believe so, yes.
As part of the same suite of documents as the guide to the preparation and layout of investigation red label case files that I showed you before lunch, was a document which I would ask to be shown, which is POL 00115674. Thank you. Have you seen this document before?
Well, only yesterday, when I observed Mr. Furlance giving evidence, I'd read press reports about it being presented through a foyer earlier.
Did you see it in the course of your career within the Post Office?
I certainly did not, no.
Are you aware of a document similar to it circulating within the security team, either of the Post Office or Royal Mail Group, giving guidance to investigators on how to fill out the bit of the file template which requires them to state the identity code of a suspect?
Well, over the years, there have probably been a number of documents drawing directly on the Home Office terminology to identify the code numbers, which, as I said, are 1 to 6 and then 9. And they certainly didn't they didn't give the sort of IE, which I presume actually should be EG, underneath the different descriptions. They certainly didn't give a description such as the one at number 3. There is a standard set of terminology used by the Home Office, by police services, by anybody in this line of work. And as I say, it's a very crude and I think outdated system, but it's required for the PNC. And I have no idea why somebody would feel it necessary to interpret the neutral terms in this way.
Putting aside the racist and offensive language within the document for one moment, it makes no sense, does it? Because you're contributing information to the Police National Computer for use of Law Enforcement UK PLC in the future. And it's got to be consistent with how everyone else understands the identity codes.
No, I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. The terms, as the Home Office used them, had no need of interpretation, and, as I say, certainly not the word that's used at number 3.
Although the Post Office is currently investigating the origins and the period over which this document was within circulation within the security team, information provided to date suggests that it was circulating within the security team between 2008 and 2016. Do you know who would draw up a document like this?
I don't. I mean, you know, I would have to assume that a document like this would receive some sort of assurance at some senior level in the team, whether it was drawn up by somebody senior within the team. I have no idea. And as I say, I've no idea why anybody would feel the need to do this other than for racist purposes. And I cannot imagine how it got through any sort of reasonable assurance process.
So it's got 7 ID codes on it, each of which is said to relate to a type of person. And you'll see that, for example, white-skinned European types at number 1 is defined, in fact, by a series of countries.
Yeah.
Or nationalities. And so white people are presumed to be British.
Which is nonsense. British people can be from any ethnic grouping, just as French, German, Swedes might be. As I say, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever from any sort of operational perspective, and as it is deeply offensive. I can't imagine why anybody would do this other than some sort of dog whistle racism.
And that category 1 wouldn't accommodate somebody like me, would it? I'm British.
Like I say,
I've got brown skin.
No, it's an extremely crude system. I mean, there is a better system in place employed by the Met Police, a 16-point self-description. So a suspect is asked to self-describe themselves. But you're right. This system here, if somebody had to make a judgment, you wouldn't be accommodated in category 1. No.
And I'd like to be defined as British. I've got a passport, and there's other things that I could point to demonstrate my Britishness. But I wouldn't fall within category 1, would I?
No.
Because of my skin colour.
This stems, if you take it back to the days when it was called an ethnic group, it stemmed from the need over the police radio to give a number. I don't quite know whether it needs to give a number, but anyway, to give a number which, for somebody in pursuit of someone, gave them an opportunity to narrow down the look of the person they were following. It was crude then, it's crude now. I am very much surprised that the PNC, well, certainly by the time I left, they were still using these codes. So I was surprised in 2017 that they hadn't got round to putting something much better in place, other than the fact that all the previous records would bear the old data. But yeah, no, it's...
And so ID code 2, just to deal with this shortly then, mixes up skin colour with nationality.
Yeah.
As well, doesn't it? In relation to category 3 Negroid types, is that language which was within use in the Post Office and Royal Mail when you worked within it, within them?
No. Well, I'll put it this way, never within my hearing. I probably had a bit of a reputation for being extremely sensitive about these sorts of things. And frankly, I wouldn't have tolerated it. And something like this would have required someone to go and get very severely re-educated, and probably I would have considered that a person who could produce a document like this and put it forward could not work within the security team, because we were a team that were particularly sensitive to allegations of bias, partiality and racism, and we couldn't have somebody who could consider this to be acceptable. So I wouldn't say for a minute that we didn't have within the team one or two racists, but because that's an inevitability. But I can't think of anybody who would have dared to produce something like this working for me.
Did you work with, or did he work for you, Dave Posnet?
I believe he did. I mean, I couldn't honestly say I knew him well, but I recognise the name. Yes.
And what was your opinion of him as an investigator?
Well, as I say, honestly, I think he was well thought of as an investigator, but I didn't know the individual particularly well myself. ID code 5
refers to Chinese and Japanese types, i.e. Malaya, Japanese, Filipino, Burmese, Siamese, Mongolia, etc. This is referring to people who are Siamese. I think you'll probably remember that.
I might just about remember Siam, but I think...
1939, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Well, in fact, I wouldn't remember it personally. I can remember the term being used, yes. But,
it became Thailand.
Thailand, yeah.
And ID code 6, Arabian and Egyptian types, are referred to in contrast to Negroid types. You'll see Negroid types includes African amongst its subcategory or its definition. That's in contrast to North Africans within Arabian types. So you never saw this document, and you're expressing amazement to the inquiry that it was ever written and never challenged, so far as we can tell at the moment. And I think you told us that it doesn't make sense why it would be used.
No, I mean...
Because the subcategories aren't in line with what the police service were using.
Well, exactly. They don't really. I mean, the language is abhorrent, but the detail is misleading. So I think it would be very unhelpful indeed if something like that were being provided to individuals, well, of any sort, but I mean individuals who hadn't seen the proper definitions as produced by the Home Office.
Okay, that can come down, thank you. Can we turn, please, to poll 308-8867? You'll see that this is the front sheet. We'll come on to the actual document itself, to a document, the title of which is Liability for Losses Policy for Agency Branches. Can you see that?
I can see that, yep.
The version control suggests that it's version 1.7 of...
But I think we know from looking further down that it's version 2. And that, again, looks to me like a piece of... something that should have been updated and wasn't. Yeah,
I mean, you're referring, if we go over the page, please, to the last box.
The fact that as part of the progress we've actually got a 2.0 suggests to me that this is version 2.
And then if we go back, please, putting that sloppy drafting to one side, we can see that Mr. Furlintz wrote it, and you are the owner of it.
That's correct.
What does being the owner of a policy entail?
I suppose ultimately accountability for the policy. Essentially, it means it's a policy which emanates from a team that I was in charge of. Although I know, I don't want to sort of to second guess your next questions, but I know we're going to come on to the issue of the contractual liability for losses, and that itself stems from the sub-postmaster's contract. So in a way, this is an interpretation of the liability that is clearly sort of laid out in the contract that sub-postmasters signed with Post Office Limited.
And so the short answer is, as owner of the policy, you are responsible and accountable for its terms.
That's right, yeah, yeah.
And we see under approval that business input, there's a series of names, and then under assurance, you're listed by your name and your title.
Yeah.
And then under authorization, you're listed by title.
Yes.
And so what does, as well as being the owner of a policy, it denote that you gave assurance for or to the policy?
Well, it meant that I went through the policy after all of the input, all the business input had gone in from all of these people. Martin would have collated all of this together and undoubtedly shown me a draft. Well, I'm not convinced that there was a significant change in this document from previous documents. Within the bundle, there is a document that goes back to 1998, which is broadly similar. But there were some minor wording changes, and I will have gone through the document and satisfied myself that I was happy for that document to be published in my name.
Just for the transcript and for the future, there's no need to show it. Now, the document from November 1998 that I think you're referring to is poll 30088094.
Yeah. And my point is that some critical pieces of wording in this document actually sort of exist in that document that predated my joining Post Office Limited.
And why are you mentioning that?
I just think it's worth noting.
Yes, but why?
Because I know that you're going to go on about, you're going to go on to question me about the element about liability.
So you sort of getting in first and saying I inherited a policy.
Sorry, I shouldn't do that, right?
No. Well, no, I just wanted to know, is that what was about to come? I inherited a policy and...
I'm not saying that I didn't own that policy. I just wanted to demonstrate the fact that the policy, the principles within this policy are long term. They have been the principles within Post Office Limited, POCL, Post Office Counters Limited, the predecessor, for many years.
And thank you. Can we look at page 8, please? And under section 6, Horizon Issues. I think you'll be familiar with this because you were watching all of Mr. Furlintz's evidence yesterday. Section 6, Horizon Issues. I'll read it out first. If an agent feels that an error has occurred via the Horizon system, it is essential that this be reported to the Horizon System Help Desk. The Horizon System Help Desk will only consider the incident for further investigation if the branch has evidence of a system fault. If no evidence is available, the case will not be investigated and the agent will be responsible for making good the loss. System faults are very rare and are normally identified after a full investigation has been undertaken. All known system errors are managed through network support problem management. Access to problem management is via the Network Banking Support Centre. If the agent feels that the issue is not being resolved, they should flag the issue up with Network Banking Support Centre. If a known system error has caused a shortage, the agent should be given authority to hold the loss in suspense until the system error has been reconciled and an error notice issued. Do you know why this section was separated out and Horizon got its own section?
I don't know. So I would be making an assumption here, but my assumption would be because Horizon was a relatively new issue for Post, or a relatively recent change in process and procedure within Post Office Limited, it was something that needed referring to separately.
It wasn't that there were known issues with Horizon?
I was not aware of any known issues with Horizon.
Yes, you tell us in your witness statement that throughout the entirety of your time, right until you left Royal Mail Group, I think, you weren't aware of any issues with the Horizon system.
No, absolutely.
It was all working perfectly.
Well, no, I'm not saying it was working perfectly. All I'm saying is...
Your understanding was?
My understanding was, yes.
So you think Horizon Issues got its own section because Horizon was new?
I don't think Horizon Issues got its own section in... Yes, I think so. I don't believe that there was anything underhand or untoward about that section being placed in this policy document at this time?
The second sentence of the first paragraph, the Horizon System Help Desk will only consider the incident for further investigation if the branch has evidence of a system fault. If no evidence is available, the case will not be investigated and the agent will be held responsible for making good the loss. Would you agree that the effect of this post office policy is that it is saying that it will only investigate if there is a Horizon system fault, if there is already evidence of a Horizon system fault?
I would agree that that's the way it sounds, and I, yeah.
That's problematic, isn't it?
It's problematic, yeah.
Why is it problematic?
Well, it's problematic. I mean, it's problematic because it confers upon the sub-postmaster, or whoever, but the sub-postmaster in this case, a duty, if you will, or a responsibility to know about, to be able to articulate what a Horizon system fault might be. I trying to avoid getting into the areas of supposition here. I presume that the thinking at the time was that a system fault would manifest on a widespread basis. I think our experiences as people within Royal Mail of very large systems, and we had several very large systems within Royal Mail, was when there was a system fault, generally speaking, it was quite visible, and usually, it impacted quite widely, and the technicians would know about it and would be getting on with dealing with it. And I suspect that in this case, our expectation would be that whether or not somebody was able to report evidence of a system fault up front, as it were, if there were a system fault, it would become evident quite quickly, and we would be able to capture any early victims of faults within the rectification of that fault. I know that
it doesn't even say that, does it?
No, it doesn't. I'm trying to,
It doesn't say if a sub-postmaster says that an error has occurred because of the Horizon system, we will check to see whether there are any known system faults. We will look at the other branches. We will see whether it's manifested itself. Instead, it points the finger back at him or her, doesn't it? And says it's only if the branch, has evidence of the fault, will it be investigated. So only if there is evidence of a fault will we investigate if there is evidence of a fault. It's just nonsense on stilts, isn't it?
I wouldn't go that far, but I would say it certainly is not a particularly balanced way to approach the possibility of system faults within the Horizon system.
The agent doesn't have rights of access to the message store, do they?
I don't know what the message store is, but I mean the agent has very limited rights beyond those of a person running a branch. That's right.
The agent doesn't have access to Horizon log files, do they? The agent can't pull up the ARQ data, can they? How are they going to come up with evidence of a system fault?
No, I mean I accept that. I don't see how they can. I mean I can see how if a system fault takes place and it affects branches more widely, then it's feasible that they would understand that they were part of a network of people affected by a certain system fault. But as the first person to report one, it's difficult to imagine how they could do that.
If we go back, please, to page 4. And look halfway down, the section starting from a purely contractual perspective, the agent is responsible for all losses caused through his own negligence, carelessness, or error. He's responsible for losses caused by the actions of any assistants, managers, or relief personnel employed by him. And then this policy, consistent with the contractual relationships between Post Office Limited and its agents, is designed to clarify circumstances where mitigation may be appropriate and to provide a clear framework to handle individual cases. Is what that's saying that where we later write in the policy that the help desk will only consider an incident for investigation if the branch has evidence, pre-existing evidence, of a system fault, that's consistent with the contractual provisions which say an agent is responsible for all losses unless caused by their own negligence, carelessness or error. It's drawing a link between them, isn't it, where it says this policy consistent with contractual relationships between post office and agents.
Well, I think that paragraph is accurate. I think where the policy document falls down is that it's a sort of circular argument about the Horizon system, which is that for you to report a system fault, you've got to know there's a system fault, but if we don't know there's a system fault, you can't report the system fault. That, I think, is where the section we've been looking at before definitely falls down.
Is what we see written, if we go back, please, to page 8, and the first paragraph under section 6, is what we see written there another way, a different way of expressing a statement that Horizon is robust, Horizon is infallible, unless you can show, unless you have evidence that there is a system fault, there is no system fault.
I think that is a fair assessment, yes. As I have said earlier, as you heard Martin Furlitz say yesterday, it was a strongly held belief and position within Post Office Limited that Horizon was a robust system, working well. There was certainly no information shared, either widely, narrowly, if you will, with those who might need to know it, like myself and Martin, or indeed, a matter of gossip or anything like that about there being problems with the Horizon system. Had anything like that come up, either officially or merely as I say, as gossip, it's something that I would have looked into. But there was probably a degree of groupthink of accepting the position that was advanced, which was that Horizon was robust and operating well. And as I said, my own position on this, had you asked me before all of this came out, is I would have an expectation that a large system like that would either function well or not function.
The second paragraph here, system faults are very rare and are normally identified after a full investigation has been undertaken. Where did the information come from that system faults were very rare?
Well, no one ever suggested to me that there were system faults. So, as I said, I didn't write this, but I assured it. So I certainly, having read it, I would have been comfortable with the content of this policy. But I didn't write it, and I suspect, as Mr. Furlitz said yesterday, it was something that was vouchsafed to him, probably from within the Horizon programme itself. I don't think we would have written this off our own bat. I think we would have taken input, and I imagine one of the business input names would be somebody from the Horizon programme, although I couldn't tell you from those names which one.
So there's a document issue that I need to attend to, and I wonder whether we might take a short break now. Thank you very much. I see you can't unmute.
Absolutely.
But message received. Thank you. Can we say maybe 15 minutes? Thank you.
Thanks.
So good afternoon. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We were looking, Mr. Marsh, at poll 303867. Thank you. And can we go to page 8 of the document, please? The second paragraph, which I was asking you questions about, system faults are very rare and are normally identified after a full investigation has been undertaken. The inquiry has heard from a range of sub-postmasters, a large number of sub-postmasters, and indeed their families. The attitude of investigators to them was that if they raised the suggestion that the fault with the finances or the discrepancy in the accounts was a fault with the Horizon system rather than them stealing the money, the response was, that is not something that we've heard before. You're the only person who has said that. Would that reflect what's written up here, namely that system faults are very rare?
I don't think that this document would be a document from which the investigators were taking a lead, but I think it would accord with the general belief in the business that the Horizon system was robust. I mean, I'd like to think that if an investigator heard the same story about the same type of loss more than once, they would have the common sense to raise it. But I suspect that they, like myself, had absorbed a very strong belief from the business that the Horizon system was robust.
You absorbing a strong belief from the system, from the business, about the robustness of Horizon. You now know, I think, and it's been found by the High Court, and this inquiry is to adopt the findings.
Yes.
That the Horizon system was, both in its original form, Legacy, and Horizon Online, afflicted by a series of bugs, errors and defects, which either had the potential to cause or did cause shortfalls in postmasters' accounts.
Yes, I accept that.
What was the system for ensuring that you and your investigators knew about that at the time?
I cannot say because it didn't happen, but I presume that if there were any weakness in the system that was identified and admitted, then my investigators, who regularly were in contact with ICL Pathway and Fujitsu, and other team members who were actually in contact with the Horizon program, would have been made aware of it.
Was there any formalised process in place that, for the purposes of countrywide investigations, retained a database or a spreadsheet or even a running log for the purposes of investigations of bugs, errors and defects that cause or may cause discrepancies?
Well, there wasn't, because there hadn't been a report made as far as I'm aware. So again, let me say, as far as I'm aware, there wasn't, because as far as I'm aware, there hadn't been such reports made and accepted and validated within Post Office Limited. And I recognise that is clearly a failing of the circumstances in Post Office Limited at the time, that everybody had a groupthink that the Horizon system was robust. And certainly, I think, had any information come to us about a first bug in the system, then we would have developed a process to ensure that we captured details of any further bugs. But to the best of my knowledge, nothing happened to trigger any suspicions that there might be problems with the Horizon system.
This document in its first paragraph here says the HSH will only consider the incident for further investigation if the branch has evidence of a system fault. Who was the Horizon System Help Desk run by?
I don't know. I suspect that was either Fujitsu or it was a specialist tier at the NBSC, the Network Business Support Centre. I couldn't say which one.
Was there a system in place for recording issues raised, complaints made about the integrity of the Horizon system for the purposes of disclosure in criminal proceedings?
Well, no, there wasn't such a system. There was, to answer part of that question, well, the Network Business Support Centre had a very effective system for capturing details of any issues that were raised with them, not just Horizon, any issues at all that were raised with them, which is how they tended to get on top of problems with products and things like that fairly quickly, because they'd pick up the fact that there were 2, 3, 4, half a dozen reports made. So I would have thought within the Network Business Support Centre, if these sorts of issues were being raised, they should have been captured within their system. But I didn't, I had nothing to do with running the Network Business Support Centre. I just happened to know from having discussed that with the people that did.
But what about putting in place a system in advance? We're running an incredibly complicated computer system here. Everyone in IT that you speak to says that it will have bugs, errors and defects in it, which have the potential to...
No, I'm sorry. No, everyone I speak to...
says that it would be perfect all the time.
Well, I don't think they'd necessarily have said that, but they certainly weren't advancing the viewpoint that there would be all sorts of bugs, errors and issues. I think...
You see, Mr. Marsh, we've had a succession of IT people come in and out of this inquiry room to say exactly that. Don't worry about the bugs, errors and defects. They're present in every IT system.
Right.
Everyone knows that, they've told us. And therefore, the bugs, errors and defects that you're seeing, nothing to worry about. Was there not, at a design level, right at the beginning, thought given to, we're introducing a big system here. It's very complicated. It runs billions of transactions. It's foreseeable that there will be faults with it. We need to record those because they might have a modest impact on our investigations. There might be an occasion just once in the next decade when it's the computer's fault and not the individual's.
Well, that certainly, I hate to use the term in hindsight, but in hindsight, you're right. What I would say is, had anybody given us that initial trigger to tell us that there was a first bug with the system which affected an office, which caused a loss that we might have investigated, we might be investigating or have investigated, we would undoubtedly have put such a system in place. So I know that that's a little bit sort of retrospective, but we would have done that had we had any indication that there was such a problem. To the best of my knowledge, we never had that indication. So it is an omission that we didn't have essentially an empty database waiting to capture details of any bugs or system issues, but I would have expected the Post Office Limited to have acted in a way different to the way that we now know it did act, and to have been open about problems so that we could have responded to them rather than to hide them. And Fujitsu, both the relevant parts of both businesses.
Who do you understand to have been doing the hiding?
Well, I only understand from the reports that I've read that it's certainly Fujitsu, and I wonder whether within Post Office Limited there may have been people who were also aware. But I don't know. As I say, I knew nothing about this when I was at Post Office Limited, and I have no recollection of the issues being raised when I continued to work in Royal Mail Group.
Have you spoken to any of your friends and colleagues from the time, i.e. between 1999 and 2007, and to say, hey, look, what went wrong here? I feel a modicum of responsibility that many people have been wrongly convicted.
I haven't.
I feel a modicum of responsibility that some people went to prison. I want to find out what went wrong. Do you know what went wrong?
Sorry, do you mean have I asked?
Yeah, have you asked?
I have spoken. I don't speak to a great many of my former colleagues in Post Office Limited. That was a lot further back in my career than the last 10 years at Royal Mail Group, but I have spoken to people. I haven't come across anybody who I knew or who worked for me at that time who has any knowledge whatsoever, who says that they had any knowledge of the issues. So the only answer to the question what went wrong that we have at the moment is what we pick up from the reports from the inquiry and those around the inquiry in the press and other media. I haven't come across, I haven't searched for it because I was pretty sure that I was going to be called as a witness, but I haven't come across anybody in the course of sort of socialising who has said, oh, I know what went wrong, or I knew about that.
And can we look, please, at FUJ 0012 6036? And can we look, please, at the bottom of the second page, please? Okay, I'll just say that out loud so that other people and the chairman can hear. The Wi-Fi has dropped out of the building, or at least the room that we're in. The transcriber is continuing to make a continuous record of the proceedings, and therefore that will be available at the end of the day. There's just no lifetime transcription. Subject to anything you would say, sir, I propose to continue.
Oh, we always do continue in these circumstances, don't we?
Yes, thank you. So looking at the bottom of the second page, you'll see this is an email from, I think, Clive Reid to Ruth Holleran, to you, and copied to Sue Harding. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Can you help us with who Clive Reid was and what his position was at about this time, January 2004?
No, I can't. I think he was to do with the Horizon project, or to do with a programme around the Horizon project. I honestly don't know. So I'm only taking that in context from the email that I've seen.
Okay, if we just go to the end of the chain, page 4, we can see his signature block. He was the chief systems architect.
Yeah. So I mean, he was sort of front and centre for all major information systems projects.
And one of the things he's dealing with is the impact programme, which you will recall and which you've spoken about in your witness statement.
Yeah.
And he says, if we go to the top of page 3, please. As you know, we're currently in the middle of requirements workshops on the final phase of the impact programme. Although we have a scheduled stakeholder meeting early in February, given the tight timescales, there are some emerging concerns which I think I need to flag up. And then he sets out suspense account threshold. And if we go to 2, his second heading, suspense account authorization. The current assumed position is that subject to the threshold control above, the requirement to seek telephone authorization for posting variances to suspense would cease on the understanding that improved timeliness and visibility of office liabilities, next day single view of office cash and liability, would provide sufficient control, given that currently there's a 2-week lag between suspense postings and visibility of those centrally. The operations and security view was that removal of this control would declare open season on the use of suspense postings, leading to loss of financial control, spiralling, non-conformity, etc. And then if we can look at your reply, please. If we go, scroll down, please. Thank you. Second paragraph, you say, Clive, on the suspense account issue, I'm afraid I share the same beliefs as mine and other ops reps. If there's no independent control and authorization process for the use of suspense accounts, then postings will rapidly increase to unacceptable levels, irrespective of our aspirations for a simplified process to support commercially minded agents. I believe that many of those of a more historic mindset will exploit the facility, creating a large parcel of manual work for someone, NBSC or retail line, to agree terms to reduce each individual posting. And then reading on, you say, given the overall project should simplify reconciliation and settlement significantly, and should therefore mean that errors will be identified more rapidly and will be even more clearly the fault and responsibility of the agent, is there any reason to have a suspense facility at all? This might mean that in extreme cases, the agent would need to contact the retail line or MBSC and negotiate a loan at some level of interest to cover very high values of loss. But in most cases, the agent should be sufficiently capitalised to cover ordinary variations, particularly if the opportunity were offered to make good losses via a credit card, thereby enabling them to tap into up to 56 days of interest-free credit, a facility favoured by the NFSP, despite my early misgivings. So you, I think, from this were in favour of removal of the suspense account facility?
No, just to be clear, I wasn't in favour of removal of the suspense account. But what made me very concerned was the retention of a suspense account without any controls around it. So the suspense account, and I had to sort of remind myself of this as I was producing my statement. The point about the suspense account was if you balance your sub-post office and you find that there's a £1,000 shortage, and you've gone through absolutely everything in the office, so it's not an error that you've made in the office, and this is both pre and post Horizon, you at that point in time, you were not allowed to balance the office until you'd made contact with the NBSC, you'd recorded this loss with them, and they gave you authority to put the loss, to record the loss on your balance sheet, or I presume they gave you some sort of code or something for Horizon. I don't know about that. My concern was, the proposal was that effectively they get a button, this, I think was it settled centrally button, which would enable them to take a loss of any size and put it into a central account. They balanced that night, which was a good thing, obviously, but there was no process in place. The idea of settle centrally meant I put this £1,000 into a central account and I put a £1,000 cheque into the till that day. But we knew that a lot of sub-postmasters were not sufficiently capitalised to do that, and it was going to cause a problem. And the point is, as things stood pre this email, or at least sort of before the changes that they wanted to make, there was a control mechanism. The NBSC had to take a view and have a discussion with the sub-postmaster about how they would handle the loss. So I wasn't in favour of removal of the suspense account, but what I really wasn't in favour of was this halfway house of a suspense account with no controls around it.
Who were you referring to? What did you mean by those of a more historic mindset will exploit the facility?
Obviously, a lot of the sub-postmasters that we had... Well, I'd taken on the audit team. When taking on the audit team, I'd taken on the losses policy, and I'd had to learn a lot about sub-postmasters, which I already knew, but in a way learn about the behaviour of sub-postmasters that was definitely non-criminal, but that involved losses. And obviously, for one reason or another, quite a lot of sub-postmasters suffered losses on their balancing night. And frequently these were losses that would come back. They had accidentally handed a cheque back when they were taxing a vehicle, and perhaps taxing a large number of HGVs, which could run to tens of thousands of pounds. These sorts of things happened all the time. And if they were able to say, I know where this loss is, to the NBSC, then they could record it. There were some sub-postmasters whose attention to detail was not sufficient, and who ran up quite a lot of losses, large or small, and tended to find ways to get them put into the suspense account and then leave them there, and need to be chased to get them cleared. And that was an onerous job for the retail line. And all I was suggesting was that some people, without the control of having to explain to the NBSC how the loss had occurred, would be more likely to make use of that facility and therefore cause more work for somebody.
Why would the overall project result in errors that would be even more clearly the fault of the agent?
I mean, that's not good wording on my part, clearly. I think the point essentially was I was still buying the line that we would have fewer errors. Well, essentially, Post Office Limited didn't make a great many errors itself that impacted upon sub-postmasters in what you might call the manual environment. There were challenges to remittances from time to time. So, if we remitted £10,000 to an office and they said they'd receive £5,000, that would be a matter for debate and negotiation, except for the fact that around about the same time, we'd automated the cash centres, so we actually knew exactly what we had sent out. There was a video record of it. So we were sort of engineering errors out of our own supply chain, and therefore my belief at the time was that hopefully the number of errors would go down, but the responsibility for those errors should not be Post Office Limited's. We should be running a very tight ship, and therefore if errors occurred, they're more likely to be somehow in the domain of the sub-postmaster.
And therefore the sub-postmaster should take out a loan on a credit card?
What I'm saying there is there was a real problem with sub-postmasters that had been building up for many years. If you went back 20 years before this, it was a very remunerative job, business, owning a sub-post office. And over the years, as things like pensions had gone into bank accounts and the DWP had stopped paying unemployment benefit through post offices and gyro checks weren't paid through post offices, the remuneration to sub-postmasters had gone down and down and down. And I was very sympathetic to them about this, and it had gone from being a business where they could absorb losses if they happened because their income from the business was very, very significant, to a business where they were basically running sub-post offices in many cases as a means of attracting customers into their other private business, and their margins were much narrower. So I think we had a number of discussions about how the people who owned the sub-postmaster's contract did not want to change the contract and the liability within the contract. So a method had to be found to enable the agents to manage any losses that were their liability without it impacting too seriously or too immediately upon them and their business. So the possibility of, in inverted commas, a loan, brackets at some level of interest, was one possibility. And as I say, I wasn't particularly comfortable about what the NFSP had suggested about allowing the use of credit cards because, I'd seen in other areas ways in which people got themselves into trouble with credit cards. But it was a means by which sub-postmasters could possibly have dealt with their losses.
Last topic, please. Can we have on the screen HOCO 601, please? Thank you. I'm going to ask you a series of questions now about the repeal of Section 69 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. This is a letter written in 1995, July 1995, from the Post Office to the Law Commission. What function were you performing at this time, July 95?
I was probably the regional manager for South East Region in the Post Office Security Investigation Service, I think at that time.
I think you would have been aware of the fact then that Section 69 of PACE covered or governed the admissibility of computer evidence in court proceedings.
Yeah.
And that such evidence was only admissible in criminal proceedings if it could be shown that there were no reasonable grounds for believing that the evidence was inaccurate because of improper use of the computer.
Indeed.
And at all material times the computer was working properly, or if not, that any aspect of the computer that was not working properly did not affect the production of the evidence. I've summarised it. If we can scroll down, please. We see that the letter is written by the Post Office's head of Criminal Law Division. And in their third paragraph, they say, in practice, the operation of Section 69 of the 1984 Act is somewhat onerous from a prosecution viewpoint, I consider that computer evidence is, in principle, no different from any other sort of evidence, and it should, in general terms, be admissible, so that any argument in court would relate to its weight rather than its admissibility. I therefore consider that there should be a presumption that the machine is in working order, etc., and that if the defence wish to argue otherwise, then clearly they should be able to do so. At present, I therefore consider the evidential requirements to be far too strict and can hamper prosecutions. Did you have any involvement, whether as part of a review, a survey, an obtaining of opinions amongst investigators that led to this view being expressed?
I don't think I did, no.
Is it a view that you would have agreed with as an investigator?
I think certainly at the time, because the big problem as an investigator that we always had with Section 69 was finding somebody who knew enough about a computer to be able to give that statement.
What trouble did you have in finding such a person?
It was, I can remember with the Department of Employment producing a document, producing a schedule for us, and when quite properly, probably I think the same lawyer asked for a Section 69 statement, spending a very long time chasing them to find a person who felt that they were technically competent to give that statement. So
when Horizon was introduced in 1999 and you were head of security, presumably you turned your mind to how on earth are we going to find a person that can give us a Section 69 certificate?
I think that was
or statement.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that was one of the things that had already been addressed by one of the people in my team who'd been involved in discussions with.
Who was that?
Jiu-Jitsu. Who was the person?
Yeah.
I think Tony Utting had been involved in that.
And what had been the product of his involvement in that issue?
Well, I think we had at least one person who was listed as a competent authority to give such a statement, both when Section 69 was in place, and if we required a statement in future post Section 69 regarding the good operation of the Horizon system.
Did you know who that person was?
Well, not at the time. I mean, I think I could tell you now that it's...
Who's the person that you understand it to be?
I understand it to be Gareth. Is it Jenkins?
There is a person called Gareth
Yeah,
Jenkins,
I think that's the person. But I have to say, I've sort of picked that up, so it might be a false memory, as it were, that I've picked up from going through the documents I needed to go through for my statement.
I just want to press you on that a little then. But when you took over in 1999, you're saying that Mr. Utting had gone through a process of establishing how...
Can I... Let me step back, sorry.
Yeah.
A person within the team, so I would rather not say it was Mr. Utting because I don't know for sure, but within the team, that aspect of things was already in hand, and I believe that we had a touch point, a contact point within Horizon, and I think, again, it would be wrong for me to firmly say that I thought it was the individual Gareth Jenkins that I named. So all I can say to you at this point in time is that it had been dealt with in the team. It was something which was not problematic, but
What was your understanding of how it had been dealt with in the team?
Well, that we had made clear what the requirements of Section 69 were to, as they were at the time, ICL Pathway, and that ICL Pathway had made clear that they had a person who was able to provide that statement.
And what involvement did you have in this? Did you see any material that established that the Post Office had made clear to ICL Pathway what the requirements of Section 69 were, and had been in turn told by ICL Pathway how those requirements were going to be satisfied?
No, I don't remember seeing any such documentation. And again, I'm going to say that I would only expect to see documents like that in a situation where there was a problem, not in a situation where everything appeared to be going forward as it should do.
And so you would agree with the general view expressed in the second part of this letter that the evidential requirements of Section 69 were too strict and could make it difficult to prosecute?
I think I would definitely, I mean, this is, again, the benefit of hindsight. I think I definitely agree with the second part of that statement, that it certainly was, from an operational perspective, hard work sometimes getting a person to come up with, or finding the right person to provide that evidence. Whether I would say now, I don't think I would say now that they were too strict. I think it was probably a good discipline. I think even at the time I probably thought it was quite a good discipline. It was just difficult because there were so many amateur, if I can use that term, amateur experts, if you will, in IT generally, even in quite large businesses. It was the person who had a Sinclair ZX80 at home who became the first person to look after the first computer and seemed to kind of morph into the person in charge of IT. And when you tried to kind of get a proper statement, a Section 69 statement from that person, they were unable to effectively describe why they should be the person giving it. So it was problematic.
Section 69 of PACE was repealed on the 14th of April 2000
yeah.
By the enactment of Section 60 of the Youth and Criminal Justice Act 1999. And the effect of that repeal was that the common law presumption became applicable, namely a presumption that the computer producing the relevant evidential record was working properly at the material time. The effect of this was to shift the burden such that an evidential record was automatically admissible unless evidence that was admissible could be produced to the contrary. Was the effect of all that, the repeal of Section 69, to enable the Post Office more easily to prosecute sub-postmasters?
No, I don't think it was to make it, to enable the Post Office more easily to prosecute sub-postmasters, because, as I say, in this case, I firmly believe that we would have been given the necessary Section 69 statement if we asked for it. And we would ask for it in the belief that if it were given with the certificate at the top of the statement from the person saying that if they said in it anything which they knew to be false or did not believe to be true, they could be prosecuted, that would be a sufficient preventative to them saying anything to us that they knew to be false or didn't believe to be true. So I don't think it particularly helped us. I think that when the head of Criminal Law Division sort of sent that view into the Law Commission, I don't think that he was at variance with any of the other prosecuting authorities in the country, really. And it may have made life simpler in some other areas of Royal Mail, perhaps, but it didn't actually materially alter our ability to use evidence from Horizon.
Mr. Marsh, thank you very much. They're the only questions that I ask. I think there are some questions from the Hodge, Jones and Allen's team and some questions from the Howe & Co team. So I think Hodge, Jones and Allen first, please. Thank you. So if you just wait there, there'll be some more.
Certainly. Thank you.
Mr. Marsh, I act for a number of the sub-postmasters, and the first thing I'd like to do is ask if we could have document WITN 0597 0148. This document, when it comes up, is an agenda for, as we can see, the Horizon management of security in the live environment. As far as I know, we don't have minutes for this meeting, so we only have this rather skeletal description of it. But as we can see, you're invited to it. And we can also see that a number of other people are invited to it, which you may be able to help us with. Len Clay.
Worked for me was a technical physical security expert.
Derek Pratt.
Almost certainly the person I ought to have named rather than Tony Utting, I suspect, when I talked about the person who had involvement with Horizon.
And when you say had involvement with Horizon?
Well, sorry, we'll see when we look at this. I haven't seen this before. Well, I haven't seen it since 1999. But Derek Pratt worked for me and was the leader of my admin team, but was himself an experienced investigator.
And when you referred to Horizon issues, were you talking about exactly what you've just been talking about with Mr.
Yeah,
Beer?
I mean, again, I couldn't say for sure. Let's see what it says in this note here, but it may well be it was Derek Pratt rather than Tony Otting, or may well be a third person.
And then we've got David McLaughlin. Do you remember that name?
David, I knew, and David worked for me many years later. I'm not quite sure what he was doing then, but yes, yeah.
And then Dave Hulbert is a name that we've heard in connection with quite a lot of IT sort of issues. Business service management. Can you tell us what you think he was doing at that time?
I know, yeah, I'm guessing... I might be mixing him up with somebody else. I thought he was something to do with the NBSC, to be honest, but business service management, I think, probably may well have sat within the NBSC, and it was just about making sure that everything was in place necessary to keep post offices running.
Right. Well, John Marr and Jeremy Folkes, we can see, are both people who were in Horizon Product Assurance.
Yeah.
And indeed, we've heard from Jeremy Folkes that he was involved in trying to ensure that Horizon data would meet Pol's prosecution requirements.
All right, good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
If we go down, we can just see in very broad terms, I think, what the meeting was about. It says under work areas, security incident management, including liaison with and escalation from pathway, security compliance, physical security, cryptographic security, ongoing risk assessment, liaison with other post office security interests and other authorities, e.g. threat assessments, security viewpoint for change management, staff vetting for ICL pathway, fraud investigations interface, security point of contact for pathway.
Yeah.
So it seems to be covering quite a range of Horizon issues, and in particular, fraud investigations interface suggests, does it not, some discussion around getting hold of...
It certainly suggests the sort of discussion that Mr. Beer and I were just talking about in terms of who made contact with Horizon to get, amongst other things, a Section 69 statement, yes.
So maybe a Section 69 statement, but also the kind of material that would underpin the Section 69 statement. Yeah. In other words, the very evidence that you were going to rely on for Horizon. So it looks as if here, at least, you were indeed involved in those discussions. It's somewhat in contrast, would you not say, with what you told us earlier about not really understanding anything about the ARQ process or what that was about.
I was going to just say, if you just roll up the document for a moment, you'll see that this document refers to a meeting less than a month after I arrived at Post Office Limited, and I was going to about half a dozen meetings a day about a lot of things that I was trying to get a grip on. This was only one of them. At this time, I don't think that Horizon had started to roll out other than on a test basis. I'm sure I was there, and I'm sure while I was in that meeting I paid attention, and I'm sure that I delegated both to Len Clay and Derek Pratt as appropriate and to other people from outside. I don't remember anything about it, and I don't remember terms that were used then. And certainly Horizon, because it wasn't an immediate issue at that time, was something that I made sure other people were properly dealing with. Because it sounds like an excuse. When I came into Post Office Limited as the new head of security, the previous head of security had gone sick about 3 months earlier. Nothing whatsoever had happened in that 3-month period. I literally walked into a room full of filing cabinets, no form of handover at all, and I was working very hard to pick up on what was going on a much wider basis than Horizon. So I really apologise for not being able to give you the level of detail that you might wish, but I wasn't sort of hiding anything when I said none of these things meant anything to me. Horizon was one of those things that I delegated to others to deal with because I had, at that time, more urgent issues coming up.
Is it a case of distancing yourself from something which has become a burning platform?
Seriously, it's not. I mean, I've said to many people on the inquiry over the last few months, if there's anything I can do to help, I want to do it. I mean, this is a dreadful situation. it's a dreadful situation. I feel that it is a dreadful situation to have been involved in, even unknowingly. So if I could help you, I would help you. But it's not as though I could even make, you've heard me say I'll try to make some assumptions or suppositions to Mr. Beer to help fill in the gaps. I can't with this. It was at a point in my joining Post Office Limited or Post Office Network, when I had just had a vast amount of other things going on, and I'm not trying to distance myself from it.
Thank you. That document can come down. Have you listened to the human impact evidence on the way people were treated by your investigators?
I have listened to some of it, not all of it. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go through one account with you because it dates from 2001, so it was an investigation that happened on your watch. If we could have INQ 401035, please.
I think I probably have read this one. This is...
Tracy Felstead's.
That's right, yeah.
Well, if we go to page 4, and then when we get to page 4, if we scroll down to page 14 on the internal numbering, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll just read from line 22. And this is about the interview that she had. What did they ask you and what did you say? This is the question being put to Tracy Felstead. They asked me where the money had gone, what I'd done with the money. Never at any stage was it, what do you think has happened? Was there any reason for this to happen? It was very much I was being asked constantly, what have I done with the money? Where has the money gone? I was being accused from day dot. What did you say? There wasn't much I could say, apart from that I don't know where the money's gone. I don't have the money. How do you explain something if you don't understand it yourself? Did something else then happen involving the post office a little while after the interview with the 2 post office employees? Yes, so then I was put on leave. I was asked to leave the post office. I was suspended while there was further investigation. I was told, taking place. And then it was a few weeks after that, I can't even remember the time, really early in the morning. I was staying at my mother-in-law's and the door, well, I wasn't actually there, but I had a call. I'd gone out early that day with some friends and the post office investigators were at my mother-in-law's door with 2 police officers to take me to the local police station to interview me, which was Peckham, I think, wasn't it? Yes, Peckham Police Station. Were you taken to Peckham Police Station? I wasn't there at the time, but I gladly went to Peckham Police Station of my own accord, and at this stage, I then asked for legal representation because obviously going to a police station is, I thought this is serious now. It had escalated. It had, yes, very quickly. Can you remember, were you interviewed at the police station? I was. I don't think you were arrested, were you? No, I weren't, no. You were interviewed under caution voluntarily. Yes, I was interviewed. The police had nothing to do with this. I was interviewed by the same 2 investigating officers from the post office. By the same 2, you mean the ones from a few weeks before? The ones from the previous interview, yes. What was the interview like? It was horrendous. The only way I can explain it is that I felt bullied. I was a young girl. I was in a police station. I couldn't justify where this money had gone because I don't know where the money had gone. I couldn't explain anything. And I was just constantly being asked, did you pay for your family to go on holiday? What did you spend the money on? And it just kept going on. And then in the end, my solicitor said, just say no comment because they're not asking questions, they're just interrogating me. When the Court of Appeal came to look at the matter all those years later in April 2021, in its judgment, the Court of Appeal records that your record of interview says that you were asked questions including, can you demonstrate how you did not steal the money? Yes. Do you remember those kinds of questions? Yes. You were asked whether you could satisfy the officers that you didn't have responsibility for the £11,000 that was said to be missing? Yes. So you were being asked to prove how you had not committed a crime? Yes. What do you make of that?
It sounds like a very difficult and unpleasant experience for a person who at the time was a very young individual. This is one of those cases where I did ask if any of the case papers were available so I could I thought it might come up and I wanted to look at it to see if I could understand the context. I mean, I can understand a certain context here because from the way it's articulated, it sounds as though a stock that this lady had been working from had been put away, recording a certain amount of money in it, and when the officer in charge took that stock out for somebody else to use, which the person may not have expected to happen, there was less money than was recorded there. The amount of money was necessary to make it balance. This was an offence that happens from time to time, and it's an example of one of the few offences where we don't tend to have, well, not so much corroboration, but we don't tend to have a series of events. We just have the one event.
Well, I can help you with that. This offence arose from Horizon losses which had developed between December of 2000 through to February of 2001.
I'm sorry, let me change my language there. What the investigators thought they were dealing with at that time looked like an offence that we have dealt with in the past, before Horizon existed, where a person had taken money out of a till, put it away in the safe, expecting a week or two later when they came back from holiday that they would be the person to take that till out, and being caught out by it being used by somebody else. I think from the way that reads, they did not behave as I would have wished them to behave, because they were dealing with a very difficult interview where essentially there was one single event and they were basically saying to a person, there is no other explanation that we can come up with.
Well, there wasn't one single event, that's my point. These were Horizon losses which developed over a series of months.
I'm sorry, that's not how I read it. How I read it was the fundamental issue is that a till was put away, recording, for example, £30,000 in it, and when it was taken out, not by the lady who put it away, it only had 20.
Well, that's simply not what happened. That's not this case.
Sorry, I must have misread these. Whatever happened, listen, whatever happened, that does not sound like the way.
Excuse me, both of you. I don't think we can, in effect, delve into the particular factual circumstances which happened so long ago. The plain fact is that the Court of Appeal quashed this conviction because it was a Horizon case, Mr. Marsh. All right.
No,
so
sir, I absolutely agree, sir. I was asked. Absolutely.
And so I just don't think it will help me for you to try and explain why the investigators may have adopted the line they did. The complaint is simply that they did adopt that line.
And other than trying to provide context, sir, all I can say is I accept that and they should not have done.
Right,
and I apologise.
Do you accept responsibility for the fact that your investigators were so unprepared for Horizon and that they were, frankly, bullying and expecting somebody to disprove that they'd committed a crime?
I don't think I can accept responsibility for the fact that we did not know about the problems with Horizon. I will accept responsibility for the fact that I clearly had investigators working for me who did not behave with the sort of, or did not treat the suspect with the respect and care that she deserved. So I accept that people working for me behaved inappropriately with the suspect. I don't honestly think we knew nothing about Horizon, so I cannot, we were dealing with a case which I believe the investigators thought they understood, but they went about investigating it in a way that was inappropriate.
Thank you. That document can come down. In your annual reports on the numbers of prosecutions, did you break down prosecutions so you'd be able to see how many prosecutions were of sub-postmasters?
Yes.
And did that number go up or down over the years you were in charge?
It certainly, it went up over the year, the years when I was in charge compared to the few years prior to that, because there had been 3 years prior to my taking over when POID, my old central team, had stopped investigating. We were not investigating. We had handed some investigators over to Post Office Counters Limited, and within Post Office Counters Limited, there had been a degree of laxity, and one of the ways in which that demonstrated itself was people just not getting on investigating cases. So the numbers that were investigated and prosecuted after I arrived, the higher numbers has more to do with the lower numbers before I was there. And you will see, and I'm not sure that I necessarily trust the numbers that have come out. I think there has been a lot of data lost over the years, but there appears to be a dip shortly before 1999 when we took over. And I think, again, an improvement in the efficiency of the investigation team from around about 2001, after we changed the structure again and made it a national team of investigators. And I recognise that my national team of investigators were working without all the information that they needed to do their job properly, but they were doing their jobs properly and professionally as they understood them at that time. And that, I think, would be why the numbers may have increased.
And did they increase between 2000 and the later years as more post offices became Horizon post offices?
I don't think so. I haven't got the data in front of me at the moment. Do you think so?
Because as a sort of a curious person, you might wonder, mightn't you, whether an increase in investigations and prosecutions during that time was a consequence of Horizon.
I genuinely think, but the data that the inquiry were able to share with me, which was very partial, it doesn't support this position, but I actually think we reached a sort of a level in 1999, 2000, 2001, and that was based on the number of investigators that I had. From that point onwards, I was subject, as everybody else in Post Office Limited was, to regular headcount reductions, 10% here, 20% there. We had fewer and fewer investigators. The evidential requirements to take cases to court always increased, they never decreased. So the time it took an investigator to put a case together was longer. So I think actually if we had all of the numbers, we would see that the numbers of prosecutions overall dropped off.
Sir, can I intervene?
Yes.
Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
On two bases. Firstly, Mr. Whittam, on behalf of Fujitsu, asked a series of Rule 10 questions pursuant to Rule 10, having produced some Freedom of Information Act replies that the Post Office had given over the years. There were 5 of them, and a transcript of evidence or submissions of Mr. Altman, Queen's Counsel, in the Court of Appeal Criminal Division, also giving some information as to numbers of prosecutions. That data appeared in conflict internally, i.e. no safe conclusions to us appeared capable of being drawn on those Freedom of Information Act replies, in part because of acknowledgements within some but not other of the replies that the data, particularly pre-1999, was incomplete and unreliable, and as to variance between whether the number of investigations brought was the relevant figure and the number of convictions obtained was the relevant figure. Additionally, the inquiry had previously written to the Post Office asking for compendious data on this issue, and we're presently waiting in an evidential form, namely via a witness, some evidence on this very issue, because we thought it was unsafe to proceed on the basis of data that appeared to be inaccurate or incomplete. The second reason for intervening is that this wasn't one of the HJA questions for which permission was sought, less still granted. And so I think it's probably best for both of those reasons that this comes to an end now.
Thank you, Mr. Beer. I'll move on then. Just the last question is this. You say that the aim of your investigations was for all cases to be fully and fairly investigated and to gather all evidence, whether in support of the allegation against it or in mitigation. That's something that Mr. Beer's already taken you to in your statement.
Absolutely.
And what we do know from the pattern of prosecutions over the years, including the years that you were in charge, but also subsequently, is that investigators in your department would gather the evidence which supported the allegation from Horizon, the ARQ data, but they would not gather any evidence which might show that Horizon was not robust, such as evidence of flaws or defects, even if that was explicitly raised, as it was in many cases. So in many cases, it seems that your investigators abjectly failed in their aim that you stated for them. Would you accept that?
I have no evidence before me about investigators failing to take account of information on bugs or system errors. If that is the case, there can be no doubt that they did not fully and fairly investigate the allegations that they were looking at. So all I'm saying is I haven't seen anything within any of the documents that I've been shown, and I have no personal experience of I have not been told that before now. If it is the case, then they did not do their jobs properly. That is true.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Is it Mr. Steen or Mr. Jacobs?
Mr. Steen, sir.
Yeah, fine.
Mr. Marsh, I represent a large number of sub-postmasters and mistresses, and I'm instructed by a firm of solicitors called Howe & Co. I'm going to take you back to a document that you've looked at. It has a reference POL 000 88867. And page 1 of that document, please, Frankie. Now, you looked at this document with Mr. Beer, and if we just centre ourselves on it, we've got the date about the fourth line down, which is September 2003, and it says there replaces all previous versions. Do you see that, Mr. Marsh?
I can.
Okay. Now, we know the author of this who gave evidence yesterday, and we know the owner is yourself. If we just scroll down a little bit further, we see then the audience. And I want to go through, I'm sorry, my fault, sorry, Frankie. Under audience, back up the page, please. Very grateful. So next to audience, we've got retail line, agents, NBSC, transaction processing, finance, security personnel. Now, just help us a little bit further in relation to this document. Who's the retail line?
The retail line are the management of all post office branches, I guess at every level, right up to the director of network, right. Network director.
Okay, so it goes to all branch managers.
I don't necessarily know whether the document will have been no, not branch managers, sorry, the next level up.
Right.
So the managers of branches and the retail network manager, who would be the contact point for sub-postmasters. Right. But I wouldn't say it necessarily goes to all of them. When we say audience, what we mean essentially it's being written with the expectation that they may read it or need to read it.
So it goes to them?
Well, it could go to them, yeah. I'm not.
What's the point in having this document if it doesn't go to the people you've just mentioned, which are the branch SPM line managers? By
this time, documents like this tended to be held centrally on the intranet, and they were there for people to consult. So I'm really only sort of raising the point that rather than go to, people went to it.
All right. Thank you for, I think, defending the line managers. The agents, who's next? Who are the agents?
Well, it's hard to say, really. I mean, I wonder if that should read retail line, comma, well, I mean, it does read retail line, comma, agents, but I wonder if essentially what it means is the retail line for agents, because I'm sure that we would not have specifically shared this document. I mean, there was no mechanism to share this document with agents, i.e. agents are sub-postmasters. So agents are a sub-postmaster of an individual sub-office or the nominee sub-postmaster of a large number of offices. They were all referred to as agents at the time. But my suspicion there is that should perhaps have been hyphen agents or colon agents or something like that, because we wouldn't have been sharing this document with agents and there wouldn't have been a mechanism for them to access it.
Why not share this with sub-postmasters? What's the problem in this?
I don't think there'd be a problem with it. I just don't think that there was a mechanism for it to happen.
Well, what you just said, you don't think you would have shared it. So what's the problem in sharing this?
No, I'm not saying that there was a problem. I'm merely saying, rather like saying that the audience could go to it rather than it going to them, I don't think agents would have had the mechanism to go to it because it would have been held on an intranet within the post office IT system, which the agents themselves didn't have access to.
Let's try it again. It's your evidence, Mr. Marsh. You're the one saying you don't think this would have gone.
Yeah.
Well, what's the problem? Why shouldn't a sub-postmaster have had an interest in reading this particular document?
Just to be absolutely clear, I am not saying that they shouldn't. I am trying to explain that I don't think they would have, because I cannot picture at that time that there would have been a mechanism to do so.
Oh.
So I'm not saying that we would have prevented them from having access, just that I don't want you to think that every agent in the country would automatically have received a copy of this as soon as it was assured.
You don't think, as an example, that a sub-postmaster should be told very directly by essentially its boss, the sub-postmaster's boss, that they're going to be held liable for all losses, whether it's a system fault or not? You don't think that they should just be told that?
Whether I think that or not now, I'm trying to explain to you what I think happened at the time, and I don't think that they would have had this policy document shared directly with them.
At the time, let's just unpack that. At the time, which is 2003, what would have been the problem in just telling sub-postmasters the exact contents of this document?
None whatsoever.
Right. There was no provision, though, as you are making very clear, for them to be given a copy of this document.
The provision could well have been via the retail line hyphen or colon agents, but I'm not able to tell you whether or not that happened.
Right, NBSC. You know what that means, don't you?
The Network Business Support Centre.
Right. Now, Network Business Support Centre, that's the internal post office support centre,
So
including a helpline, is
That's
that right?
the two-tier helpline at Dearn House near Doncaster, yeah.
Right, OK. You were answering questions earlier from Mr. Beer about the different types of help desks, and you seem to be uncertain. So you're aware of the help desk that's operated by the post office, yes?
Yes.
Right. And you're also aware of a help desk system that's operated by Fujitsu, is that correct or not?
Are we talking about the Horizon System Help Desk?
Yes.
What I said, and I'm in the same position now as I was then, is I don't know whether the HSH was operated by Fujitsu or by Post Office Limited.
How long were you in post?
I was in post for 6 1/4 years.
And at no time did it cross your mind to figure out the answer to that question? Who on earth is operating this helpline?
Well, I wasn't responsible for the helpline, and again, it was one of those things I had not heard at that time. And indeed, I don't know whether it is the case that there was anything problematic with the helpline, but it was way outside of my area of responsibility.
OK. Transaction processing.
Yes.
Who's that?
It is a team of people in Chesterfield who literally do what it says. So from prior to 1999, what they were doing was a very manual job where they were literally taking bits of paper and collating them and making sure that the right clients were settled suitably, and that was something which gradually migrated into the automated environment.
I think we can imagine what finance means. That's essentially the money team, is that right?
That's the money team, yeah.
OK, security personnel.
Would be people working for me, and their access to this would have been via our own intranet site, and they would have been made aware, I imagine, at the point when this was assured that there had been an update to this policy.
And help us understand a bit more. Your team, you embody that as the head of security.
Yeah.
That covers investigations, is that correct?
At this point in time, I think this is probably actually the version 2 in January 2004. And at this point in time, that would have included, so that would have been the investigation team, the external crime team, the physical security team, who were the technical experts, the audit team under Martin Furlintz, and then an admin team.
Okay.
And a commercial security team as well.
Right, so this document is going out, either physically or an intranet, to all parts of the managerial system managing the sub-postmaster system. It's going to the internal operated helpline for the post office, and it's going to all of the security, in other words, investigation staff. Yes?
Well, they are, I think they're recognised as the audience. And then, again, it's not going to.
Right.
It is available to and of interest.
Assuming they're doing their job, it is going to them and they're reading it.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And we know that this is drafted by by Martin Furlinch, National Audit and Inspections Manager. So it's got his group, if you like, involved as well.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's quite wide coverage of this particular policy going out at that time. And around this time, were you aware of the impact programme that was being put together by Ms Harding?
I am now aware, and I probably was at the time, and if you'd asked me this before the inquiry contacted me, I wouldn't have been able to recall that. But yes, I'm aware now. I've seen documents.
Because it is around this time that she starts the programme of putting together what becomes then the impact policy, which is then implemented, I think, in about 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, can we go to page 8, please, Frankie, of this document? Right. Section 6, Horizon losses. Now, you've gone through this with Spear, and I don't intend to repeat that. You can see the second paragraph that system faults are very rare, it says here, and normally identified after full investigation has been undertaken. Now, second paragraph goes on, the last couple of sentences. If the agent feels that the issue is not resolved, they should flag the issue up with the NBSC. Now, that's the post office helpline. That sound right?
Yeah, sorry, yes, I'm just finding that in the paragraph. Yes, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And it goes on to say, if a known system error has caused a shortage, the agent should be given authority to hold the loss in suspense until the system error has been reconciled and an error notice issued. Okay. So if we put these two together, these two paragraphs, it says this: if an agent feels that an error has occurred via the Horizon system, it is essential that this be reported to the Horizon System Help Desk, the HSH.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we both agree, do we, that the HSH was operated by somebody?
Yes.
Okay.
There are two groups of people, one of whom
Exactly.
was, yeah.
There's the post office and then there's Fujitsu.
That's right.
It's likely to be one of those two, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. And if we almost use a process of elimination, here it then says in the second paragraph, a reference to the MBSC. There are two groups of people, help people, that an individual SPM can report to if they feel there's a system error. Yeah?
Yeah.
So do we understand that this tells us that agents may have system errors?
I think we were aware of the fact that there could be system errors and that there needed to be a process, and this is a not very good process for reasons that we've already explored with Mr. Beer. It's a circular process that doesn't seem to help sub-postmasters in the way that it should have done.
Right. And there's emphasis, isn't there, on the knowledge that there is the possibility of an error because of the last sentence. If a known system error has caused a shortage, the agent should be given authority to hold the loss in suspense until the system error has been reconciled and an error notice issued.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, so that tells us two things. First of all, that there's acknowledgement there that system errors can cause shortages. Yes?
Yes.
Yes? And secondly, that there needs to be a system, therefore, for where system errors cause a shortage, and that is put the shortage in suspense.
Yes.
Yeah, so it tells us those two things. Right. Now, a number of answers to Mr. Beer were along the lines of, if you were aware of a first bug in the system, then you would have caused all sorts of things to take place. You'd have made sure that there was an understanding of what was happening, checks maybe weekly, monthly, as to what's going on in the system. Now, this document in 2003 is talking about known possible errors in the system, Mr. Marsh.
It's talking about the possibility of them. I mean, in a way, it is actually noting, as I said to Mr. Beer, or the thing I said to Mr. Beer wasn't in place, which is a process, for us to note system bugs. I mean, it's not a good process, but it's a process. Essentially, there are two routes by which a sub-postmaster should have been able to report system bugs, which would have informed the security team, amongst many others, and that's either the Horizon System Help Desk or the MBSC. And as I have learnt, and obviously the inquiry learnt and the appeal court learnt some time ago, these processes did not work. And so the belief that I held in all good faith that nothing had been reported during the time period that I was head of security about bugs and system errors, well, I'm not saying that anything necessarily had been reported, but it sounds as though we'd made it quite difficult to report, and it only took the HSH and the MBSC to not take note, or possibly, and I'm only, well, and to not take note of that for this information not to find its way through.
You were interested in fairly investigating and prosecuting.
I was very interested in fairly investigating and prosecuting, and if the issue had been raised with me, I would have insisted that it were investigated, irrespective of the impact retrospectively on however many investigations had taken place, because had we known about this at an early stage, yes, we might have had to make an admission to the court about a number of investigations leading to prosecutions that had taken place using evidence that was not now considered to be safe. But I would like to think that had this information come forward, we would have been able, or Fujitsu would have been able to do something to render that information once again acceptable as evidence. So I think not only the worst of this is a great many people have suffered injury, trauma, and distress, but it's all for such a stupid reason, because had this come out as soon as somebody somewhere knew about it, we were problem solvers. We would have got on and solved the problem. So in hiding it, they did they did damage to a lot of people and no favours to anybody.
Right. Let's go back to where we started. You say you're interested in the fair investigation and fair prosecution of sub-postmasters.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a yes, putting everything else aside.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in terms of that investigation, you were head of security, you were in control generally of investigations.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And you're prepared to take, if you like, you're the boss in relation to this aspect.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're prepared to take the rap. Yes? All right. Let's find out a bit more from you about what you didn't do. Now, help us understand this a little bit more. In terms of those fair investigations, you're aware of this odd body called the HSH, but you're not entirely certain where it exists, whether that's Fujitsu or POL. Do you not think it would have been sensible to perhaps work that one out? Is this a Fujitsu system, or is this a POL system? Do you not think, in terms of your fair investigations, just getting the answer to that simple question, Mr. Marsh, might have been helpful?
No, at my level, I don't think that adds any value at all, unless I believed that at some point lower down, at my head of investigations level or below that, there was something amiss. So if I felt there was something amiss, then I would have been, as the saying goes, all over it. But I didn't think there was something amiss. My understanding was that things were going well. It was not an area in which I needed to have that level of detailed knowledge, because I would never have been in direct contact with the HSH.
You never bothered to even try and make contact, Mr. Marsh. You never got any of your investigators to make contact with the HSH.
Well, no, I'm
you
not.
weren't even sure.
No, hang stop. No, you cannot assume.
Very sorry, Mr. Marsh. Both of us in error there.
Absolutely,
I'm the
yes.
advocate. So, did you ever, via an investigator, try and find out what on earth is going on with the HSH?
I did not, but that does not mean that my investigators were not at various levels in contact with ICL Pathway Fujitsu and with the Horizon programme, and satisfying themselves as they went through investigations and at a policy level that things were going as they should be and that there were no issues that we needed to investigate.
Have you found a policy that says to agents or the security department, let's make sure we know what's going on with HSH?
No.
Now, Mr. Marsh, you've said repeatedly that you are essentially waiting for someone to knock on your door to tell you there's a problem. This document says there's a problem.
No, it doesn't. No, let's be quite clear about that. This document does not say that there's a problem. This document outlines what the steps that would need to be taken if the suggestion was that there were a problem. but it does not say this document was not drafted on the basis that there were a problem, because had that been the basis on which it were drafted, Mr. Furlinth and I would have dealt with it.
Investigations are meant to be investigations into the question of whether somebody has committed an offence, yes?
Yes.
And investigations, are you aware they're meant to be investigations that point in the direction of any evidence that someone has committed an offence, or whether they haven't? In other words,
I mean, I've repeatedly, and preemptively made that point, that I am well aware of that, and that was the basis on which I wanted to see my investigators operate.
Then how was it embodied within the investigation system that there was a check on complaints, difficulties, problems with the Horizon system going to the help desk? How was that done? If you're saying essentially there was no policies?
No, again, you see, I'm not saying there was no policy. What I've said is I would expect there to have been processes that would have ensured that we knew about this, but the documentation that I have been given access to 20 or so years after I was last at Post Office Limited, as Mr. Beer has said, is partial. So I have said on a number of occasions that there are areas in which I think there were very much were policy documents. Now, I'm not saying that there was necessarily a policy document, but I will say I firmly believe that there would have been a process of some sort that would have ensured that the minute anything became known via the HSH, whoever controlled it, or via the NBSC, that materially impacted upon evidence that we were gaining from Horizon, that would have been made known to us. But I cannot present you with a document because I am 7 years retired from Royal Mail and 13 years gone, no more than that, sorry, 16 years gone from Post Office Limited. I have no access to, if I were appearing in front of you as a Post Office Limited manager, I would have expected a team to be running around for weeks beforehand, gathering together all of the materials so I could answer these sorts of questions, if indeed that material still exists. But a lot of it did, and it's unfortunately not available now. And I do apologise for the fact that I can't be more absolute in my statements, but no, I am confident that there would have been a process to ensure if anything were known about the Horizon system, it would have come to us along with a great many other departments in Pol immediately.
Tell us what you did wrong, Mr. Marsh.
Tell me what exactly it is you're
You know what's happened here. People have been prosecuted that shouldn't have been prosecuted. That was under your watch, under your period of time. What did you do wrong? What's your failures?
Clearly, I did not ask the right questions of the right people. But, I mean, I have no recollection of asking. I don't think I ever said to anybody, listen, there must be some system failings because there's no such thing as a system that doesn't have failings. So I certainly think that I am guilty of essentially absorbing the groupthink within Post Office Limited, that this was a good, solid and robust system, and that, there was nothing wrong with it at the times that we spoke about it, and that we had processes that would ensure that we would be made aware. So naivety, if you will, but certainly nothing with any form of intent. I did not know about the problems with the Horizon system, and had I known about them, and had I known about them as early as it might have been possible to know about them, I'd like to think that a lot of the distress and trauma caused to people might not have happened, would not have happened.
That it, Mrs. Sean?
Yes.
So, in fact, there is one question from Mr. Maloney, which will be a very short one.
Are you expecting that, Mr. Beer?
No, he has said that to me.
And I don't lie, sir. And Mr. Marsh.
Yes.
I just want to understand the relationship between you and Mr. Scott, who's going to give evidence later. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you moved to be the Group Security Director for Royal Mail Group from 2008.
Let's take it back and I'll give you the details. So I moved in on the 2nd of January 2007 to become the General Manager Security for Royal Mail Letters. Nothing to do with Post Office Limited whatsoever. And then, yes, in 2008 I became the Group Security Director.
You're going to get me into trouble for taking too long. If
I'll do this quickly. I apologise, sir.
So,
right, Mr. Scott.
No, let me ask you the questions
Go on then.
first. I'll ask you about Mr. Scott in a second.
Okay.
But just let me ask you about one document, which is poll 30786. So that's poll 30786, page 1 of that. And this is an owner for you. If you would, if you could just scroll down just slightly. This is the policy on crime and investigation, and you're the owner of this.
Yep.
Created in September 2008, and still the owner in 2011.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Could we go to page 4 of this document, which outlines your role as Group Security Director under this policy? It's at paragraph 5. So we could just scroll down on this page, and we see all of your responsibilities under 5.2. Group Security Director has a responsibility 2, and then it goes on 5.2.1. Establish appropriate structures are in place to enable the prompt and thorough investigation of any allegations of criminal offences committed by employees, agents, members of the public. Establish an effective crime response plan commensurate with the level of crime risk identified as facing Royal Mail Group at a given point. And then under 5.2.3, the various appropriate mechanisms that you're required to establish to report levels of crime risk, significant incidents to the board, remedial actions to prevent or deter further crime, engage with the Corporate Risk Management Committee, Audit and Risk Committee, and the Mail Integrity Group on matters of crime risk and mail's integrity. And those were your responsibilities as Group Security Director from 2008, when the policy was created, and still here in 2011. Yeah. Did you have, and now, if I could ask you, did you have any management or oversight role in relation to John Scott at Poll during those times?
No, I didn't, no.
Right. Was there any relationship between you in practice during those times?
It wasn't a good relationship. Shortly after I had left Poll, Rick Francis, who had been my boss very briefly and was then John Scott's boss when John was appointed as my successor as head of security, essentially said to me that Poll was, even at that point in time, was preparing itself for, I don't know whether he said separation or a greater independence, but some sort of parting of the ways from Royal Mail and POL, and that he would like to see John Scott left to his own devices to get on and run the department, run the team as he wished to. And from that point on, I adopted an approach which essentially ensured that all of the resources that Post Office Limited could need were available from Royal Mail Group. We made very few requests from Poll, and those requests that we did make were rarely answered effectively. It wasn't, as I say, a great working relationship, and I regretted that. And quite a number of people in Poll, when we had vacancies on the Royal Mail side, sought to leave Poll and come across to Royal Mail as investigators or security managers.
So far as these responsibilities were concerned, you didn't feel that, so far as your point in the group, that necessarily meant you had any responsibility for what went on within Poll?
I had discussed the situation with the person that I worked for, and we concluded that it would be difficult. So I don't dispute exactly what that says there, that the Group Security Director has responsibilities. And certainly 2008, 2009, I did try to assist John Scott to make sure that he had all the necessary resource and all the advice needed. He didn't really welcome advice from me. By the time we got to 2011, when this document's dated, we were all, the two businesses were working very much towards separation, so there was a piece of work going on to ensure that any documentation that we had or had generated within Group Security that Poll might need was available for them to take away and rebadge as they wished to, but I'm afraid that was about as far as it went. And of course what I knew was how heavily the team in Poll had been reduced in headcount, much as my own team in Group Security was. So on both sides of the fence, we were losing staff every few months, to another review and a headcount reduction. It did make life very difficult.
Would it be fair to say then, and this is my last question, would it be fair to say that there were stressors within security during that time?
Yes, I mean there were tensions between Post Office Limited security and Royal Mail Group security, but there were stressors on both sides of that divide, if you will, because all of us were continuing to try to do as much as we used to do. And this isn't just investigation, this is a huge amount of physical security, process security, protection of individuals and so on, with less and less resource. So it was difficult.
Did you feel you were under-resourced in security?
I did feel that, and I made that point clear very many times, yes. So, that will be on record in a number of places, I'm sure.
And so far as Mr. Scott is concerned, I can't ask you to speak for Mr. Scott, but did you get the impression that Mr. Scott felt that he was under-resourced in security?
I never had that level of discussion with him after we parted ways. But if you asked me, I would have said that the level that he got down to was definitely less resource than reasonably was required to do the jobs that I thought were probably still necessary in Post Office Limited.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marsh, and thank you very much, sir, for allowing me to ask those questions.
All right. So I take it, Mr. Beer, that's the end of the questioning of Mr. Marsh.
Yes, it is, sir.
So thank you, Mr. Marsh, for your detailed witness statement and for spending a good deal of time today answering very many questions. I'm grateful to you.
Thank you, sir.
10 o'clock tomorrow morning?
Yes, that's right, with Mr. Jenkins.
Yeah, fine. All right then.
Thank you very much, sir.